Hello, viewers and listeners of the Strange Oddities podcast. I'm your host, Matthew J. Haas. I'm excited because tomorrow we're getting a snow day from what I do for work. There's going to be a snowstorm coming tomorrow morning. Hopefully, we don't get much accumulation. I got my winter beard going on to keep me warm. I'm excited. We're going to get ready to geek out with science and space explorations, commercial space. We're going to get into a lot of sciencey talk here on the Strange Oddities podcast, and I'm going to welcome this gentleman in a couple of seconds. But as always, guys, I get that boring stuff out of the way. It sounds like I repeat myself at the very start of the show every episode, but I get it out of the way so we can have the whole rest of the show with our guest because we have an awesome guest that I'm going to introduce to everybody. So let's get that stuff out of the way. Guys, if you haven't subscribed, please subscribe to the show. It's on YouTube and Facebook Live simultaneously. You can watch on either, comment, chat live, ask us questions during the show. 8 p.m. Eastern Time every week, Thursday night. What else am I missing? Subscribe on YouTube. That little bell, that bell icon at the top of the screen at the main page. Just hit that. You'll be subscribed. All guest announcements, guys. If you want to find out what guests are coming up every week, follow me on Facebook. Follow the Strange Oddities podcast on Facebook. That's where all the info about the upcoming guests that I announced that's coming on the Strange Oddities podcast. And I have a huge lineup for January. So I hope everybody had a happy new year, a healthy new year, healthy holidays that just passed. I want to wish everybody a Merry Christmas, Happy Kwanzaa, Happy Hanukkah, whatever you celebrated. It's the new year. 2022 is the first episode of 2022 for the Strange Oddities podcast. So I'm excited. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce this awesome gentleman on the show. Formerly worked for MSNBC. He created the website Cosmic Log. If you go to cosmiclog.com, there's a lot more info about him there. He actually has almost it's a 20-year anniversary. He started Cosmic Log back in 2002, somewhere around there. So happy anniversary to you. And he also currently writes and does journalism for GeekWire. He may look familiar to you as he, like I said, worked for MSNBC. He even has a book. He published a book about Pluto, believe it or not. Pluto, yes. He has a lot to say about it being a little dwarf planet. But it's an interesting book. I recommend everybody check it out. So I'm going to go ahead and get this gentleman in here. So without further ado, I want to welcome to everybody Mr. Alan Boyle. Alan Boyle, welcome to the show. Thanks for coming on tonight.
Hey, thank you for having me, Matthew. And hello to all your readers and watchers and listeners.
Yes. We're geeking out. I was telling Mr. Boyle before we started, I growing up was a big fan of Carl Sagan, and I remember taking video VHS tapes on the Cosmos and the docu-series he did with that, and just I loved outer space. I loved everything space, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn. Learning about everything out in outer space, the Milky Way. Just like anything outer space, I was like, I loved it. So, Mr. Alan Boyle has a big following because he's very involved with journalism and space, commercial space and space journalism and what he writes about. I'm jealous because he actually got this tour and step inside SpaceX when it was introduced back in 2014. Tell us a little bit about that, and how did you get started in your field?
Well, that encounter with the SpaceX Crew Dragon was when that particular version of the spacecraft first came out, and SpaceX invited journalists to come down, and really there were a lot of fans of SpaceX and employees. It was really kind of a party, and Elon Musk was the master of ceremonies. So that was pretty fun, interviewing him and seeing the place. I've been to SpaceX's factory in Hawthorne, California, a few times, and it's a pretty amazing place. So I've been lucky to be in a lot of places like that, to Star City in Russia, where cosmonauts are trained, and and to, of course, Kennedy Space Center and Mojave. One of my fondest memories is covering the flights of Spaceship One in 2004 that led to the winning of the $10 million X Prize. And now we're getting to the point where a lot of those things that we dreamed about and imagined were just around the corner in 2004 are actually coming true. We're at the dawn of the commercial spaceflight era, where people are actually paying millions of dollars to fly into orbit or fly on a blue orbital, suborbital spaceship. How I got started was that I've actually worked for 19 years in the newspaper industry, and I was the foreign editor at the Seattle Post-Intelligencer in the 1980s, and there was this thing called the internet that got started in the 1990s, and so I thought, wow, this is the future of news, that someday we would be getting our news over the internet, and someday we might even be watching video over the internet. And so I started at MSNBC, and I started doing stories about really, things that were of interest to regular folks, including Comet Hale-Bopp, and the Mir space station had a big collision, and people almost died when a cargo ship crashed into the space station. And we had the Mars Pathfinder mission, a landing on Mars, and the first time that a working rover was able to drive around and see what was going on in Mars. And we even had the 50th anniversary of the Roswell UFO incident in 1997. And so I went down to Roswell to cover that and all the UFO goings on, talking with some of the people who were involved in the Roswell UFO incident. So my editor said, well, you should be writing about space full time, because a lot of people seem to be interested in that. And so that's what I did. And for 19 years, I did that at MSNBC. And then I went to GeekWire in Seattle and continued to write about that, focusing on commercial space, because that is something that has really attracted a lot of attention and investment over the past few years. And so here I am. That's how I got started doing what I'm doing.
Nice. Yeah, here we are now, and you're on the Strange Oddities podcast.
Who would have thought it?
Yeah, reflecting
video
back.
On the internet. What a weird idea.
Exactly. But what are some of the most interesting, favorite things that you were more interested in writing about, rather than more of a work thing? What were some of the more interesting things personally were you into that fascinated you the most about writing about space?
Well, I think I mentioned the Spaceship One flights in Mojave, because that was just something completely different. The idea that some billionaire, in this case it was Paul Allen, could actually start up a private space effort and actually send things into space with the help of Burt Rutan and Scaled Composites. They were able to do that, and Paul Allen followed up with Stratolaunch and SpaceX. I mean, just going to SpaceX launches and to SpaceX headquarters and seeing what they're doing. That's always a lot of fun. With the COVID era, it's not as easy to get out and be out in the field and actually watch a rocket launch. But we were able to do that. I went down to the Blue Origin launch when Jeff Bezos went into the capsule along with three other folks, and for the first time they had a crewed launch in the Blue Origin spaceship, and that was a lot of fun. I have had the opportunity to talk with Jeff in fireside chats a couple of times, and that's always fun to kind of get a chance to sit down with one of the richest people in the world. So
yeah, you don't get that too often.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
So those are fun when you go out in the field and you actually see a rocket launch. It's different from seeing it on video. The brightness of the flame as the rocket ascends into the sky is always so much brighter than you can see on video. And so there's really nothing like it.
Sure.
yeah, we're getting more and more launches like that. And so if you ever have a chance to go down for a launch,
Yeah.
it's really worth doing it.
Oh, I
There's
would
just
totally
no
love.
equal.
Yeah, like it totally night and day difference between watching it on TV and being there in person.
Right.
The adrenaline that you get alone, just being a fan of watching these things launch, and just the workmanship and all the talented engineers and all the work that goes into these craft to
Mhm.
get men and women into outer space from the start. That
Mhm.
in itself is so what's the word I'm looking for? Commending and respectful, because you're going into space with people's lives, and if we know in the past things have gone wrong, so it's a huge deal to be able to have a mission be successful like that.
Yeah, there's a sense of awe and respect for what us hairless monkeys can do on Earth. So yeah, I agree with you there. And
Yeah,
just the sight and the sound of it. Uh, in the next few months, sometime we're going to have the launch of the Space Launch System, NASA's super rocket, and I expect that will give you a feeling kind of like what you feel when the space shuttle launched or when the Saturn V launched, where the sound just kind of rushes over you and you just feel the vibration of a rocket taking off.
yeah,
That's
sure.
very awe-inspiring,
Yeah,
and it's an experience that is hard to duplicate even with virtual reality.
yeah, exactly. Like I said, it was cool to when SpaceX did their live stream recently for their most recent launch that they did when they went to the ISS station. Um,
Mhm.
like watching the live stream, I was just sitting there like, wow. you know,
Yeah.
like you said, it's amazing what you can do over live stream nowadays. But for them to be able to kind of like publicize all that, their nerves must be nerve wracking. Like for something to go hairy wrong while you have like millions of people watching them.
Right.
you know,
Yeah. Uh-huh. That's something you really have to give credit to
right?
for SpaceX, is that they really do share the experience. And I remember there were some early launches. SpaceX would provide live streaming coverage, and then there was a time when they said, "Okay, well, we don't need to stream the launch live anymore. We know enough, and we're just going to save some money there." And all of SpaceX's fans said, "No way." Keep the live stream. And so they
Right.
did decide to live stream every launch. And now that would be unusual to have a launch that it's not live streamed, whether it's SpaceX or Blue Origin or United Launch Alliance or NASA. So that's become part of the scene, and thank goodness.
Yeah, absolutely. So I can't imagine how much, like, 'cause now that we actually have people paying for commercial space flights and going into space, I can't imagine how much that would even cost. Is there like any figures or ballpark estimated how much that would actually cost?
Yeah, for suborbital launch, when Virgin Galactic started out, it was $200,000, and then
Okay.
$250,000, and now I think it's in the range of $700,000.
Jeez.
And Blue Origin, a couple of years ago, the CEO of Blue Origin said, well, maybe it's going to be in the range of $400,000. Who knows? But when they had an auction for one of the seats recently, they had the high bid of $28 million,
Oh my God.
and it turned out it was a crypto entrepreneur named Justin Sun who
Oh wow.
paid that. And so he is planning to launch late this year, and he's looking for 5 other people to come with him,
No.
and he's going to pay their fare. And
Oh
so
really?
that's kind of modus operandi for these things, that you will find that someone goes up, but there are other people who fly free just to kind of as a tribute for example, to one of the people who flew on the first Blue Origin flight was Wally Funk, who was an aviation pioneer. She never got to be part of the astronaut corps, but Jeff Bezos decided that she would fly on this first crewed flight for Blue Origin as his guest. And you find that to be the case. There's also the Inspiration 4 mission that made use of a SpaceX Dragon capsule and Falcon 9 rocket. And Jared Isaacman, a billionaire who's the CEO of Shift4 payments company, decided that he would purchase that flight. And so he hasn't really talked about how much that might have cost, but it might be in the range of, say, $100 million or maybe more. And so 4 people flew on that flight, and 3 of them were Isaacman's guests, basically.
Wow.
And then there's the Axiom Space venture that is planning to fly a pilot and 3 customers. That might be in February or so that flight takes off and goes to the International Space Station for a few days. And it's thought that each of the customers for that flight is paid $55 million.
Oh my God.
So it's a steep rate, depending on who you are.
How about you bring the rate down for the little people?
That's right. That's right. Well, how people explain it is that these things always start out being pretty expensive, and the cost is anticipated to come down maybe to about the cost of an SUV or the cost of, say, an adventure vacation in Africa or Antarctica. So the idea is that at some point an orbital vacation might cost in the range of what we think of as, say, $100,000 nowadays. Right. Now, who knows what the dollar figure is going to be when that day comes, and it might take a few years for that to happen. But that's the theory, is that the first ones start out being really expensive and not very many people can pay for it. But with scaling, you eventually get to the point where it could be kind of the vacation of a lifetime, but potentially affordable, at least for people who are kind of in that range where they can think about taking an adventure vacation. I'm doubtful that I'll ever get to that point, but it's not always going to be millions of dollars. I guess that's the bottom line.
Yeah. Now, do these people that, I don't know if you know anything about the passengers that pay to go on these commercial flights, do they have to train like as much as the astronauts that professionally work for NASA, that go up into the space shuttle and everything? Do they have to train just like them? I would imagine, right?
Well, yeah, it depends on the situation. If you're going on a suborbital flight that, basically the Blue Origin flight lasts for about 10 or 11 minutes. And so there's not a lot of training that's involved there. You do have to go through some safety training, and what happens and what the procedures are if something were to go wrong. And so that typically takes maybe 3 days or so of training, where they go down to Texas and then they stay at the astronaut complex and they get their training just for that 10-minute flight. Now, for the Inspiration 4 flight, or for orbital flights that involve SpaceX, there's more training involved there because there's more that you have to watch for. There's more that could go wrong. You have to know how to deal with an extended period of zero gravity, and some people take a while to adjust to that. It's not always a fun experience. That some people maybe get the equivalent of motion sickness, space flight sickness, and so you have to know how to deal with that. You have to know what happens if you can't get home immediately. What are the contingency plans for that? And so that takes maybe 6 months, and it's not 6 months steady. The Inspiration 4 crew went through some exercises, like they would have zero G centrifuge, where I mean a high G centrifuge,
Right.
where you experience up to 6 G's of acceleration. And how do you deal with that? You get your body used to that. You might take a plane flight and do some pretty wild maneuvers so that you're used to dealing with going in places that you never thought you'd go to if
Sure.
you were on Earth. And of course, zero G experience. And also they came up with a program for Inspiration 4 that also involved climbing Mount Rainier, which is not an easy thing to do. You have to kind of, it tests your endurance, and that's a good preparation for what you might encounter in space flight.
Right. Right.
So yeah, it depends. Orbital is always going to require more training than suborbital,
Right.
because it's more complex and riskier.
Gotcha. Understood. It's kind of like if you ever seen the movie Armageddon, when the drillers were hired to save the world,
Right.
and they went through a vigorous bunch of tests to make sure that they had to be okay to go out into the to save the world,
Right.
and on an asteroid, no less. But I would think like some kind of perseverance training to that effect.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And with Armageddon, for example, Bruce Willis not only had to stay in, had to weather the flight to space, but had to get outside the capsule and do a spacewalk. And so that takes even more training. But
Sure.
they are talking about the possibility of offering someone a flight where you have the opportunity to get outside the spacecraft and,
Oh, wow.
and maybe do some sort of spacewalk, not anything that's mission critical, but to have that experience. And that requires extra training, and you're paying extra money for that. So again, there are going to be lots of tailored experiences. Blue Origin has a program that they're working on in partnership with other companies called the Orbital Reef Space Station. So it would be a commercial space station. If they get enough funding from NASA, they would build a commercial outpost in outer space. And one of the features of that is that you're supposed to be able to have a small one-person pod, kind of like the pods from 2001, A Space Odyssey. And you can go out and kind of jet around and see what it's like in your own little personal spacecraft. So lots of options are potential for if you've got the money for it.
Yeah, exactly. It's nice to have all that kind of money. But let me just whip out $1 million so I can hop on board one of these commercial flights.
Right.
But maybe one day I'll run into a guest and they'll be like, "Yeah, I'm gonna invite you." I'll be like, "Yes."
Yeah. Well, keep me in mind.
Right.
If they say bring a friend along, keep me in mind.
Yeah, I absolutely will. But I actually one time I'm not giving up on it, but I want to get an astronaut on my show. I want to hear about all the extensive training they go through and what it's like being out in outer space, to actually get on hand information on what it actually feels like. Would be awesome to hear in an interview. Would be amazing.
Well, the good thing is that there will be a lot more astronauts coming up in the years ahead. Right now, there are 30 astronauts who have flown in commercial space programs, and it's getting to the point where the FAA is no longer awarding astronaut wings to commercial astronauts, because it's becoming more of I don't want to say an everyday experience, but more of an experience where you don't need to award a little wing pin to every astronaut that flies on a commercial spacecraft. But still, there are only a little more than 600 people who have flown in space, and so there's a lot of room to grow. But as more astronauts or more space flyers get their chance, you'll have more chances to have somebody on your show.
Nice. Awesome. And I would totally love that. But here's speaking of missions and space flight, what's your opinion? I've always wanted to ask somebody this of your background. Why is it we have not returned to the moon after all these years? I know money is probably one of those reasons, and more so maybe commercial politics, or because there's been so many other ventures they've been into more so rather than worrying about going back there. But do you think it would make sense more to go back to the moon rather than getting more expensive things like going to Mars, like with Perseverance? And what's your thoughts on the moon? Because I did hear they are planning to go back, but I don't know when.
Yeah. So that's the Artemis program. You're familiar with the Apollo program, of
Yep.
course. And the reason why Apollo happened is really kind of an anomaly that's related to the Cold War, is that
Right.
it's not that they went there just to have some fun or just for the science of it. It
Right.
was part of the Cold War competition with the Soviet Union. And so
Correct.
that's why they felt that they could spend billions upon billions of dollars to do this, is because it was to show the rest of the world that the American approach to organizing big ventures and you know demonstrating technological prowess is superior to what the Soviet Union was doing. And so that's basically why they did Apollo. That's why people went to the moon, and that's why once they did it, then everything kind of got shut down because we demonstrated that. And so
Right.
now let's save the money. We're getting into the 70s, and things are looking a little dicier in terms of the economics. And so we can't afford to do all this stuff. And so let's dial it back. And
Yeah.
then maybe let's get into the space shuttle era where you have this truck doing regular runs to Earth orbit, and we'll kind of take it step by step.
Right.
The space shuttle program didn't really work out the way they thought it would, that it was riskier than they thought. And there were astronauts who were killed in accidents, and they decided, well, we got to find another approach. And so that's what gave rise to the commercial space program.
Mm.
So now there have to be commercial reasons driving this forward. The only way that you could get back to that time where they kind of spend on it as a defense measure is if they felt like there was a space race with someone like China, for
Mm.
example. Now,
Right.
China is doing what the United States and the Soviet Union did in the 1960s. They're using their space program as a way to demonstrate that, yes, they are a technologically advanced society. And so that is kind of adding to a little bit to the space competition.
Mm.
So the Artemis program that NASA is working on right now is to return people to the lunar surface and eventually blaze the trail for having a sustainable settlement on the moon. And that is as a prelude to sending people to Mars, where you can do all sorts of things in terms of studying what the origin of life in the universe might have been, just knowing what happened to that planet. It was known to be once warmer and wetter than it is today, and it might have harbored life. And that's one of the big scientific questions, is how did life arise? What are the conditions, not only for Earth and maybe for Mars, but for places like Venus, planets outside our own solar system, Europa, which is a moon of Jupiter, or Enceladus, which is a moon of Saturn. And so this is kind of part of the bigger scientific push, and it's a little harder to make the case for spending a lot of money as opposed to making the case for national defense.
Yeah.
You're always going to spend more on national defense than you are on
Sure.
science, and so that's why it's moving a little more slowly this time around.
Right.
And so the timetable is that we have this Artemis 1 launch with the Space Launch System that is supposed to happen sometime this year. Maybe it'll be March, maybe it'll be April, maybe it'll be May, maybe it'll be even later. But sometime this year, they expect that they would have the first uncrewed launch of the Space Launch System rocket with the Orion capsule. And then Artemis 2 would be sometime in 2024. And that would kind of follow the same route as Artemis 1. It would be a rocket that goes around to the other side of the moon, orbits the moon, and then comes back over the course of weeks. And so they would do that similar route with a crew for Artemis 2, and that would be sometime in 2024. And that would blaze the trail for Artemis 3, and that's the crucial mission where you have a spacecraft going to lunar orbit and then sending down a lander to the lunar surface, and then spending some time kind of seeing how the system works. Eventually, they talk about having a gateway in lunar orbit, something that would be a permanent space station in a special kind of lunar orbit where they could send crews there and study what's going on in the moon, maybe practice their moves for future Mars missions. Maybe there might even be some opportunity for commercial use of lunar resources. Maybe that's how you support a settlement on the moon. Maybe you find something exotic like helium-3. People talk about helium-3 as being a potential fuel for fusion reactors, and it's thought that there's a lot more helium-3 on the moon than there is on Earth. And so whenever you talk about commercial applications for lunar operations, eventually someone always mentions helium-3.
Sure. And then I believe there also is evidence of possible ice, I think, on the moon. And
yeah. So that's the big part of the plan for having a sustainable settlement on the lunar surface, is that you have at the poles, you have areas where there are deep craters, and maybe over the course of billions of years, comets that have part of its composition, their composition made of water. These comets have crashed on the moon. They've deposited the water, and some of the water survives as ice. Most of it is evaporated when the sun shines on the lunar surface, and it bakes the water out of the rock. But if you go deep enough, you'd probably be able to find some water ice, and the water ice might be closer to the surface in these places near the poles where you have permanently shadowed craters, where the configuration is such that the sun never shines at the bottom of those craters. And so it's thought that the best places to put permanent settlements would be somewhere near the lunar South Pole or the lunar North Pole, so that you would be able to harvest that ice, turn it into water. And because water is made up of hydrogen and oxygen, you can use the oxygen for breathing, and you can use hydrogen and oxygen as propellants for rockets, and you can refuel your rockets right on the moon.
Yeah. And hopefully somebody from NASA is listening to this podcast right now, because we're giving them lots of ideas.
Or I think they know all this stuff.
Yeah, they know all this stuff.
You might get a call from NASA saying, well, that guy Alan Boyle didn't get this exactly right, and here's what we're really trying to do. But that comes awesome with the territory.
It absolutely does. But now, one of the things before we get into other stuff like the James Webb Telescope kind of successing the Hubble telescope, not necessarily wiping it out completely, but it improved greatly with better technology, and we're going to capture better images, and some great stuff that we expect from that. But what amazes me with all these things that we put into outer space, including human beings, is what I learned recently, which this fascinates me all the time, is how much space debris is actually orbiting the Earth. And when I read about how much actually junk there is floating around the orbit of Earth, it just amazes me that they don't hit into this stuff, and how that can cause some issues for them,
Yeah. So a lot of attention is paid by the military to keep track of orbital debris. And of course, as more satellites are launched, there are going to be more spacecraft to keep track of, and more potential for collisions. We recently had this incident where the Russians launched a missile to destroy one of their own satellites in orbit, and that was it's thought to be part of their campaign to develop anti-satellite weapons. And so that's worrisome on one level. And then on the other level, you just have all this junk zipping around in orbit, kind of like what what you saw in the movie Gravity.
Mm-hmm.
That's the worry that people have. And in
Right.
fact, recently the Chinese filed a diplomatic protest because SpaceX's Starlink satellites came pretty close to the Chinese space station.
Oh,
And
wow.
so you do have a lot of concerns. Some companies are developing ways to go and maybe catch or attach things to pieces of space debris that would enable you to deorbit that debris. You drag it down so that it burns up in the atmosphere. Others, there's a company called Northrop Grumman, which is working on a type of spacecraft that can go up and maneuver a satellite into a correct orbit. People talk about being able to refuel satellites, and so a lot of people are trying to figure out a way to address that issue of orbital debris or the number of objects in orbit in a way that makes financial sense and also in a way that makes operational sense, so that
Right.
maybe
Right.
you're not cluttering up low Earth or orbit as much as people have been.
Nice. Yeah, Grumman is out in our area. I'm sure they have facilities all over, but one of their main facilities is out here by us on Long Island, and they have a lot of that out here by us, which is cool. I didn't know that they were still involved.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. The Northrop Grumman is one of the big aerospace companies, and they continue to be. And of course, they were involved in the Apollo program as well, so they have a long heritage.
Mm. I didn't know they were still involved. So I know they were downsizing a lot of their buildings and commercial buildings in our area, but I didn't know that they were still in that much involved.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Hmm.
very cool. Um, so yeah, maybe we can get into a little bit about you. I know you're into UFOs a little bit. You kind of covered that somewhat in our conversation.
Hmm.
Um, do you think, with the amazing pictures that we're getting from the rover that NASA sent over, and then now we have Perseverance over there, do you think we're a step closer to figuring out what's going on as far as other life? Maybe whether it be Mars or here or out in outer space. Do you think we're
Hmm.
that that much step closer?
Well, I think that the Perseverance mission could move the ball in terms of figuring out uh, the potential for ancient life on Mars, and it might even get some data that would tell us about the possibility for microbial life that might be underground.
Mhm.
That's the most common uh, scenario that's proposed for life on Mars, is that you have microbes that are able to survive beneath the surface where the radiation environment is a little better, and you might have more availability of water down there as well as minerals. And
Right.
so what Perseverance is doing is gathering samples and caching them. That they take little samples of soil and rock that are dug from beneath the surface, and then they will leave those in a place where they can be picked up by a future mission and then brought back to Earth for study. Because we've got some pretty advanced instruments on the rovers, but there's no way that a rover is going to have scientific instruments as sophisticated as the laboratories that are based on Earth. And
Right.
so there's some thought that this is the way that we're actually going to find life, is by bringing it back to Earth. And I know that sounds like the beginnings of a science fiction horror movie, but people are already thinking about what planetary protection and requirements have to be in place to bring those Martian samples back.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I know the government and the military has already put together a space program or space defense program, um, in place of that they're starting out with. Just recently, they announced it a couple of years ago. I'm not sure how far involved they are with it now, which I'm sure they're already much involved with it, probably from even years ago. But it's going to be cool to see what comes about with perseverance, because I know from a technology point of view, perseverance is the most technology thing they've put on Mars today versus the rover, and the type of technology that they're able to use there, what they can see from here, and from NASA, and all that technology that goes into that. It's just, I can't wrap my head around it.
Mm-hmm.
You
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
know,
Every mission it represents another advance in the technology, and
yeah,
definitely focusing in on that question about life beyond Earth,
yeah,
and so another. Another avenue toward investigating that is by studying exoplanets,
yeah,
planets beyond the solar system, and seeing what sorts of conditions those planets have,
yeah,
and whether they might be habitable.
right.
So,
And
uh,
they are finding some that are very similar to our planet, from what I'm reading, and they're saying that could absolutely, be potential to have sustainable life, other than us,
mhm.
exoplanet.
And because it's the scientific community, and we're talking about studying things that are light years away,
Yeah,
uh, there's always a debate. Someone will say, well, this red dwarf planet is potentially habitable, and then someone else will say, well, what about the solar flares from these stars? And so that's what we're going to be hearing a lot more of, I expect, over the next couple of years, is really having a deep debate over what habitable conditions,
right.
what that really means when you're
Yeah,
talking about planets beyond the solar
right.
system.
As a science guy, if you don't mind answering this, what's your personal thought about other life out in the universe? Me personally, I just think it would be kind of naive as human species to think we're the only ones in this whole like gigantic universe that's out there, and other galaxies and like you said, exoplanets that are light years away from us that could habit life. And what's your thoughts on do you think there could be?
Yeah, I think there could be, especially if we're talking about, simpler forms of life, microbial life.
Right.
It's a question mark. I mean, this has been the subject of science fiction for centuries.
Yeah.
What sort of level of life we could see? Is there intelligent life out there, and how would you detect it? And are they already here? And that sort of thing.
Yeah.
The distances involved make it super highly unlikely that we would ever be able to have the sort of contact with intelligent life that you see in Star Trek, and the decades worth of UFO movies that have been made, unless we get into exotic physics. Somebody opens up a wormhole or figures out faster than light travel, but
Right. Right.
other than that, I think we have to think about making the investigation either from a distance or looking in our own solar system.
Right.
And I think that Mars is a good candidate, Europa is a good candidate, Enceladus is a good candidate for subsurface life, whether it's under the dunes of Mars or under the icy surface of Europa or Enceladus.
Yeah.
But other than that, looking for what they call biosignatures around exoplanets, or maybe we would someday pick up a transmission of radio signals or laser light, like you see in the Contact movie. That's
Love
a
that.
low percentage shot. I wouldn't expect that to happen anytime in our lifetimes, but it's like winning the lottery. Maybe our ticket will come up.
Yeah. Maybe. I don't know. Carl Sagan actually influenced the making of the movie Contact, which is why one of the reasons I love that movie to start with. But that was a great segue of that theory. I love the theory behind that movie, that could be the possible way if we make some kind of contact in that form. You know.
Yeah, yeah. It makes for a great story, and if especially if the aliens want to be found and they're as advanced as the aliens in
Yeah.
Contact, they could make it happen.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, if they are out there and they're that so far advanced, they have the technology and the communication that, like many people theorize that they've already been coming here and they're already having visitations and already communicating. And if that's the case, well, then the evidence could be there,
Mm-hmm.
So,
Mm-hmm. I
so
wouldn't. I probably wouldn't buy a ticket for that lottery, but who knows?
yeah, who knows? But there's a lot of unknown out there.
Mm-hmm.
But guys, if you're tuning in late, I always throw this in there toward the later part of the show. We get a lot of people who tune in later on. We have this gentleman, science journalist, Mr. Alan Boyle. His website, I want to just make sure everybody has your information. Cosmiclog.com is the website where you can learn more about him. He's got a huge bio here. Got an awesome picture of him stepping out of SpaceX back in 2014, which I'm super jealous of. um, and he used to work for MSNBC. He currently is a writer and does work for GeekWire. And he's into commercial space, and we're talking about outer space and commercial flights, and we've been hitting up a little bit about Mars and space technology and what goes into this stuff. And my God, like you can just talk forever about these things. But there's so much we can only cram into an hour of a podcast.
Yep.
But I'm having a great time. I hope you are.
Good. Yeah.
Guys, yeah. If guys, you have a question, feel free to throw it in the chat. I can't see the chat for some reason. I tried resetting all of my links for my social media, not seeing them on StreamYard. StreamYard is my service that I use, but I have my phone here and I do see them on my phone. So I'm hoping I can catch some questions here and there. If I do, great. If not, no worries. But we can let's see, James Webb Telescope. What I know you've been covering that a lot on your social media, and you've been watching
Mm-hmm.
that. That was successful. What's going on with the James Webb Telescope? Is it replacing the Hubble telescope, which we've been using for many years? What's the difference between the two? I know we got into that a little bit.
Yeah, yeah. James Webb Space Telescope has been in the works for decades, and it's billions of dollars over what was originally budgeted, and it's years later than originally planned, but it's finally up there, and it's going to be 100 times more powerful than Hubble in terms of its observing ability. It will be making its observations from a pretty special place called L2. This is a place 1 million miles farther out from the sun than Earth is. And because of the arrangement of the sun and the Earth, L2 is a stable position in space. It doesn't take much propellant to stabilize an orbit around that point and keep that spacecraft there. It's a good spot because it's a little bit shadowed from the sun, and James Webb Space Telescope has a sun shield, which was just deployed successfully, and that was a big milestone for the deployment of this telescope. There are more than 300 single points of failure that could have hurt the mission if they were to take place. And so far, it's successfully gotten through more than 75% of those potential points of failure. And so everything is looking really good. It deployed the secondary mirror. Next is deploying the primary mirror. The major part of the operation may be concluded by this weekend. And so everything is looking good. It'll take about 6 months for the telescope to be commissioned, calibrated so that it can start producing scientific pictures. Hubble is able to make its observations in a wide range of wavelengths, whether it's infrared or visible light or ultraviolet, whereas James Webb Space Telescope zeroes in on the infrared part of the spectrum. And that's of most interest to astronomers nowadays because you're able to see through the dusty disks that surround places where planets are born, and you get a better fix on planets. You're able to make observations that could tell you what the planet and what the atmospheres of these exoplanets consist of. And that might give you some of the biosignatures that we've discussed before that would be indications that there's the potential for life on that planet, which
Right.
would be really interesting.
Yeah.
And infrared observations are also good for providing information about the early stages of the universe, because the light from 13 billion years ago has come from through an expanding universe, and there's something called the Doppler effect,
Hmm.
which means that the wavelength of that light has been shifted toward the red side of the spectrum.
Mm.
And so a lot of the very relevant observations about the early universe are best made in infrared wavelengths. And so that's another reason why the James Webb Space Telescope is optimized for infrared observations.
Nice.
Now, the plan is that the James Webb Space Telescope would be working for 10 years. That was the original hope, that 5 years is the absolute minimum that they, if it didn't last for 5 years, that would really be a bad thing. If it lasts from 5 to 10 years, then that is kind of the nominal mission for this telescope. But the good news is that the launch was so perfect on Christmas morning that they used less propellant than they thought they were going to use. And so that means that they will be able to extend the mission of the telescope for significantly longer than 10 years, which is a good thing. Hubble was launched more than 30 years ago, and it's still in operation. It's had its hiccups, and it's not clear how much longer it's going to last, but the aim has always been for Hubble and Webb to make observations at the same time. That kind of helps you get the lay of the land. It's like having two, it's like having 2 points of reference. It's easier to zero in on what's actually happening with an astronomical phenomenon. And so it looks like they may be able to do that. And so that's another good thing. So Webb telescope is a lot of good news right now.
Sure. Absolutely. And I'm kind of fascinated about the whole infrared thing because connecting it to the paranormal world of things, because paranormal investigators discuss that the reason we use infrared is that the idea is that we don't see things with the normal human eye, so therefore that's why we use infrared. And sometimes we capture anomalous things within the infrared spectrum of light, and that's why we use infrared. So it's kind of cool that now space is using infrared to take pictures and document things out there, because who knows, like, the possibilities of what they will capture as far as images go.
Well, who knows? Again, I wouldn't bet the farm on that, but there's always a chance, I guess. I mean, there's enough that's fascinating about the study of exoplanets and the beginnings of the universe, that if there is something that Webb can do in terms of shedding light on some of the anomalous phenomena of the universe, that's just gravy. We know that there will be some exciting discoveries coming from the Webb telescope, and so it doesn't have to be a UFO. UFOs are great, but the settled science is exciting enough.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you think about it, like we're like this, like we're almost like nothing compared to like what's out in outer space. So there's so many discoveries waiting to be made, and I don't like we'll see some in our lifetime, but there's going to be so much more after we're gone, when we're no longer existing on this earth. And for the technology that captures much more better things in the future, it's just going to be phenomenal.
That's right. When you consider, dark matter and dark energy, the ordinary matter that we know what it is only accounts for 4% of the content of the universe. Dark matter is another 22% or so, and dark energy makes up more than 70% of the matter energy content of the universe. And so
Sure.
anyone who thinks that we've got it all figured out has got to remember that it's just 4% that we know, and the
Yeah.
rest is a big mystery.
Exactly. So it's like I feel like we're nothing. You know,
Well,
but we're not.
4%.
We're
You
here
know,
for
let's enjoy the 4% at
yeah,
least.
exactly. So we're getting down to the bottom of the show. I want to leave enough time for everything before we end and say our goodbyes to our listeners and viewers. One last question, if you don't mind. As a journalist, because I'm sure you have done your own research with many of the topics that you write about, what's been some of the most of your favorite interviews yourself? With any interviews of people or prominent figures of space, commercial space, or in the industry that you've been in, like what are some of the most awesome interviews that you remember the most? What are your most favorite interviews?
Well, the fireside chats with Jeff Bezos have been kind of highlights for me in terms of interviewing someone. Just he's a very controversial figure, so that's an interesting angle, and also he's given a lot of thought to what the future of humanity is going to be. So that's interesting too. You know, Elon Musk is in the same vein. I've interviewed him a couple of times, and he's got fascinating things to say, and also a very controversial person. I enjoyed more recently interviewing Kim Stanley Robinson, who is the author of the Mars trilogy and a lot of other science fiction works, and he has given a lot of thought to how society is going to have to evolve to face the challenges that we're going to have to face in the decades ahead. And so that was a highlight. He was kind of sitting in his backyard. We were talking over Zoom pretty much as we're talking now, but
Right.
it was still a treat to really talk with people who have a lot of deep thoughts about some of the most basic questions that we've been wondering about for years,
Yeah.
including what's going to happen to us with climate change and all the other environmental challenges that we face right here on Earth.
Yeah. Yeah. No, absolutely. That's thanks for answering that. You know, from one interviewer to the other, I always like fascinated by like, oh, what you know, you can't really narrow down. Like, uh, I'm sure a lot of them are a lot of favorites. You know, it's hard to narrow down. You know, which ones are your best. You know, to pick out. So, anyways, guys, we're at the bottom of the show. I want to make sure that you guys go to his website, cosmiclog.com. Is there any upcoming projects or events? Shout outs to anybody that you want to shout out to that has been influencing you as far as your most recent work. Any advice for the community of space and the work you're in, and any last words for the show?
Well, we always have a fiction science podcast coming up, and my co-host for that is talented science fiction writer named Dominica Fetaplace. And so, you know, keep a watch on her. I think she's going to do great. And just talking about the science fiction world, that's always fun to be in contact with people who write about, you know, speculation about what life is going to be like through science fiction. The big event that's coming up is going to be that first launch of the not James Webb Space Telescope, that we took care of that, but the Space Launch System with Artemis 1. And so I'm hoping to really be involved in covering that mission. And of course, Starship is going to be a big thing for SpaceX. And so there's lots to look forward to in 2022. And so stay tuned.
Yeah, stay tuned is right. And I would love to have you both on the show in the future if you guys want to talk about sci-fi stuff and science fiction. I would love to have an episode about that on Strange Oddities podcast. So that invitation is out there for you guys, for you both.
Okay, really appreciate it. This has
Yeah,
been great.
yeah,
Thanks, Matthew.
yeah. Stay on the line if you don't mind. We'll say our goodbyes after I end the show a little bit. And Guys, I hope you enjoyed Mr. Alan Boyle, science editor and journalist of Cosmic Log and GeekWire, formerly worked for MSNBC. His face may look familiar to a lot of people. But it was great having you on the show. I hope you had a lot of fun. I hope I was a good host. I hope I had good questions.
Yeah.
It was fun.
It's been great.
Yeah, great. So I'm going to minimize Mr. Boyle here if he doesn't mind, and we're going to talk a little bit after the show is done. Peace, guys. All right, here we go. All right, guys. Couple announcements to make for our listeners and viewers of the upcoming episodes. I have a huge month in January, as I always announce the guests coming up on the show. Guys, next week, I believe it's January 13th, we have Alexandra Holzer. Her father was the late original ghost hunter, Hans Holzer. They had a recent television series about her father called The Holzer Files with Dave Schrader, Cindy Kaza, and Shane Pittman, a team of investigators that followed her father's footsteps. I have Alexandra back on the show January 13th. The following week, January 20th, I have Jeff Bellinger. He's the researcher and has helped produce Ghost Adventures on the Travel Channel with Zach Bagans, Aaron Goodwin, and Zach Bagans is on that show, of course. And so Jeff Bellinger has another show that he does, and I believe the name of it is The New England Myths and Legends of New England. And he's got tons of books out. He's been writing about all kinds of paranormal things and supernatural things. I can't wait to have Jeff Bellinger January 20th. Then at the end of the month, guys, I'm going to have Fox News anchor Eric Shawn from Fox News. And I can't wait to have him. We're going to talk about Jimmy Hoffa and his book that he exposes the UN for the dirty things the UN is into these days. And we're going to talk about that. So I'm real excited. It's a big month for a Strange Oddities podcast in January. Big shout out to Debbie LaBelle, our co-producer of Strange Oddities. Thank you for all your hard work. And with that said, we're going to end the show, guys. Have a great night. Enjoy your weekend ahead. And I don't know, that's it, guys. Be safe, be well, stay healthy. All right, guys. Enjoy our video here.